we're still in Genesis 4. Surprise, surprise. We got pretty good ways through the chapter last week, and we're going to pick up where we left off. And then I want to show you some of the patterns that show up in this passage, because as we've been learning, if you're new to this, throughout Genesis, especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis, the author has provided certain words or phrases or concepts that are meant to be patterns. You're going to see them in each story after one after the other, and they're going to help you interpret different passages. So you'll see a certain word or phrase mentioned in chapter 1, 2, or 3 that's going to show up in 5, 6, or 7, all the way through Genesis, and some go all the way through to Revelation at the end of our Bible. So we'll pick up where we left off. What I'm actually going to do is start in verse 1, and let's just read through the chapter again. And I may point out a couple of reminders of things. And we'll focus in on Cain, who ends up going on to build a city. So we're going to kind of land there in that city and talk about that and some of his descendants. And then I want to take you, if we have time, I want to take you into the New Testament and show you how the New Testament authors viewed the Cain and Abel story and some of the things that we can learn from that, because it's always good to learn from the Old Testament, but if a New Testament author mentions the same names or the story from the Old Testament and provides more insight, then that gives us more information about how we're supposed to apply this under the New Covenant, which is what New Testament means, New Covenant. All right, so we'll just dig into verse 1, and we'll walk through. As always, if you have a question, you can interrupt, ask me a question. Don't worry about being on video and all that. I edit all that out and just put little titles up to let the viewers know what the question was. Okay, so this is a very complex passage. That's why it's taken us a couple weeks. I'm taking a class on this section of the Old Testament right now, and I think we've spent, around 7-8 hours just on this chapter. So, and there's still more. I learned more stuff today as I was just reviewing it again, and I found a whole new layer of stuff, and I was like, man, I just can't get to the bottom of this. And it's meant to be that way. If you're unfamiliar with how the Old Testament's written, especially the Torah, the first 5 books, it's meant to be meditation literature. You're supposed to read it over and over and over and over and over again, and you'll never get to the bottom of the wealth of information there. So, all right, that's enough of that. Verse 1. Now Adam knew his wife Eve, and remember, knew his wife. That's an idiom. It refers to something else. You know what that something else is. Yep. Okay. All right. Boy, y'all are vocal tonight. It's already dark outside. You'll be asleep in 5 minutes. Okay. So Adam knew Eve, his wife, and he conceived, and she, not he. Wow. Really modernized that verse, didn't I? That'll get me off of YouTube quick. All right, so she conceived, because that's what she's do. They conceive. And she bore Cain, and she said, I have created a man. It says gotten, but in Hebrew, you're supposed to think, I have created a man like Yahweh. I've created a man like Yahweh creates men. So she's comparing herself. Wow, look what I can do. I can create people like Yahweh created people. That's what you're supposed to get from that verse. And again, and the reason why that's important is because at the end of chapter 4, she's going to change, when they have Seth, the next son, she's going to change that phrase, and she's going to assign that work to God and not herself. And this one is, I have created. Yes. It does. The word help in our English Bible, that's not there in Hebrew. This was written in Hebrew. So what the translators are doing is they're trying to make it easier to read. But in Hebrew, it just says, I created man alongside or as the Lord, is what it says in Hebrew. So our English Bibles are always trying to help us understand, but sometimes they overdo it and it actually misses the point. So we just have to be careful about that. It doesn't mean they're doing anything evil in that. It just means that sometimes they overdo it. So we're supposed to think, she says, I created a man like Yahweh creates people. But at the end of the chapter, she's going to change that and not say, I have done this. She's going to say, God has done this. So that's an important distinction. Verse 2, and again she bore his brother Abel. Now, here's something I didn't do last time, but by the word brother in your Bible, you'll notice I've got a 1 and it's circled. Okay, that's the first time the word brother appears in this passage. So she bore his brother Hevel, is how you pronounce it in Hebrew. It means vapor, like here today, gone tomorrow. And in this passage, he's going to be here, and then just a minute, he's going to be gone. All right, so now Hevel was a keeper of sheep. He's a shepherd. And Cain was a worker of the ground. And remember from chapter 3, the ground has been cursed. In the course of time, which means an indefinite period of time, we don't know how long, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, which and it really means a crop of the ground. We should not be thinking fruit. We should think crop. And Abel, brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions, those parts that taste the best. So he's bringing the best of his flock, and the parts of it that he offers to the Lord are the parts you would most want to keep for yourself. That's what we're supposed to think. And the Lord had regard, or he gazed with favor. He looked with favor on Abel and his offering. But Cain and his offering, Yahweh, the Lord, had no regard, or he did not look with favor. So he's not rejecting Cain as a person. He's rejecting something about what Cain is doing. Okay? So Cain was very angry. He was very angry. He was burning hot, literally in Hebrew. And his face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? And we understand that to mean like sadness or shame, your face fallen. If you do tov, it's yatav, but it's a variation of tov in verb form. If you do tov, which means good, if you do good, won't you be lifted up? That's what it means in Hebrew. Won't you be lifted up? His face had fallen. And he says, if you do good in this situation, if you do good with your anger problem right now, your face can be lifted up. You don't have to be ashamed, okay? So I don't like the word accepted there in the ESV because that's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says lifted up. And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. If you remember from last week, where's the door? What door are we talking about? The door to the garden. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of English translators and translations and a lot of commentaries say it's the door of his heart, or it's some translate. I think the NIV translates it, sin is crouching at your door. But in Hebrew, there's not a personal pronoun there. It's an indefinite article, the door. Okay, that's what it says in Hebrew. So sin is crouching. So sin is over here at the door. They're offering at the door of the garden. They're at the entrance of the garden where God's presence is, and they're making an offering of thanksgiving to God. Yeah, question. We're supposed to think of this as sin is portrayed like an animal or a snake that is ready to strike, and it's at the door. So they're making their offering, and something is there that's called sin here that's ready to injure him. Okay? Its desire is contrary to you, or its desire is to control you, or its desire is against what you desire. But you must rule over it. And remember, those same phrases come from Genesis chapter 3 when God says to the woman, your desire is going to be contrary to your husband's desire, but he will rule over you. Same phrase gets picked up here and it says, look, sin wants to control you, but you must control it. You must rule over it. Okay? And we had some controversial discussion last week, and we can do it again if you want to. I would rather us move on. But in this passage, sin is portrayed not as something that's inside of Cain, but something that's outside of him trying to get in, trying to injure him, or trying to control him. And God says to Cain, who's a descendant of Adam, you must rule over sin. Okay? So it's important. So we need to be careful about how we talk about sin. If we tell people, here's why this is important, and we'll try to move on. What you think controls what you do. So if you think about sin as something that's inside of you that you cannot help but do it, don't you think that's going to lead to you doing more of it? So we have to be careful how we think about sin. So the way that I talk about sin is only how the Word talks about sin. I don't care what theologians say, okay? They're smart people. A lot of them are right. A whole bunch of them are wrong. And they add a lot to try to make sense out of things. I would rather just say, what did God say to Cain about sin? He said it's over there and wants to get in. Okay? It's at the door of the garden while you're trying to do the right thing. And now you're angry about something. You're jealous of your brother. This thing wants to devour you. You must rule over it. So when we talk about sin, you all have a sin problem. I'm not saying you don't have a sin problem. We all have a flesh that has desires, and we want to corrupt those good desires into bad desires. We all have that problem, right? Okay, we're all on the same page there. God said to Cain, who should have a sin nature problem based on modern theology, he told him to rule over it. So what we need to do in our minds is we need to change our thinking to think, okay, sin is something that can be ruled over. You won't be perfect, but if your mindset is, I can rule over this, I wonder if that would change our behavior some, at least a little. But if you think that sin is something you can't help, then you're probably going to justify your sin by saying, well, I couldn't help it. Or the devil made me do it. Or they made me do it. And if they hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have done this, right? We do the blame game. And where did we get the blame game from? Well, Adam and Eve and then Cain, right? So anyway, that's all. The only reason I wanted to frame it that way is not to try to crash our theology. Is to let's think biblically about these things. When we talk about sin, let's say what God said. Let's don't add stuff to it. Let's just say what God said. It's something that wants to control you. You must control it. The New Testament is called self-control. It's actually a fruit of the Spirit. All right. Verse 8, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. Did you notice brother got mentioned again? That's the second time. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother. Now, he was down low. His face had fallen. He's in that position. He rises up against his brother, number 3, and killed him. Harag. It means intentional, premeditated murder. It wasn't like they got in a fight and he accidentally killed him. Okay? He planned this out. Then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother? Where's Abel, your brother? That's the 4th time brother gets mentioned. And the same thing happened in Genesis 3 when they had taken the fruit. They hide. God shows up and goes, hey, where are you? I'm here for my daily walk with you. Where are you at? And he said, oh, where's my brother? I don't know. I mean, am I in charge of him? There's a little bit of pride in that, isn't it? Like, why are you asking me? The 5th time it gets mentioned. And the Lord said, what have you done? Same exact phrase in Hebrew as Genesis 3:13. What'd you do? The voice of your brother's blood is crying up to me from the ground, which sounds so weird to us. The voice of his blood. Your blood has a voice, apparently. And it's crying up from the ground. And that this idea of something crying upward to God is a pattern. It gets repeated in many different stories. And you'll notice it. What's that? Doesn't say that. It just says the voice of his blood. Yep. I mean, we could maybe speculate and wonder if that's what it is, but it doesn't tell us. So um, it says, and now you are. He's talking to Cain. You are cursed from the ground. Okay, not you are cursed, but you are cursed away from something. You are cursed away from the ground. He's being exiled from Eden. His parents were exiled from the garden into Eden, which is a region of land. Now he's being exiled from the land of Eden. Okay? You're cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Um, the reason I pointed out the repetition of the word brother is it's mentioned 7 times in this passage. There's a ton of sevens in this passage. The Hebrew authors love that kind of stuff. They do it all the time. There's sevens in here. There's 70 and 77, and there's some multiples of 7, and there's 14, and they're doing something here. Um, okay, so when you work the ground, that ground outside of Eden, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. In other words, it's going to fight you more than help you. When you try to grow something, it's okay. My personal opinion is that the garden and the land of Eden, the region of Eden, is the promised land, what we would call the promised land or the land of Israel. That's because of how it's described, all those rivers that you see in chapter 2. There's like this excursus and it tells you about all these rivers. They're trying to tell you this is where this place is. So I personally believe that the garden is possibly where Jerusalem sits today, is where the garden was. And he's being pushed out of ground that grows stuff easily. Yeah. Yeah, he's gonna head out further east. Hmm. Yep. Hmm. Arabia, Arabian desert, and then the further you go, you're in the land which Iraq and Iran and all that, and then to the north is Syria. That's all desert, and then Turkey and all that. So all that land around there is going to show up in the story really soon, in a couple chapters. You're going to see, oh, okay, now the civilizations are building up in this place called Babel, which is Babylon. So we'll get there eventually. But yeah, he's being pushed out of this fertile land that shows up later in the story several times to give you clues. It's like, oh, that's why God always shows up and does something because it's in this area. Yeah. So, so it's not going to yield to you its strength, and you shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. You're going to be alone and homeless. Now, here's something interesting. I learned this today. Like I said, every time I read these passages, I find something else that I didn't see the last time. And that's how it's going to be forever. Um, the word for wanderer is Eden backwards. I was just fascinated by that. You probably don't care, but I thought it was so cool. That's intentional. So the author is taking, because Eden in Hebrew is 2 letters because there's no vowels. So it's just D and N. And wanderer takes those 2 letters and flips them around, puts a letter in between them, but it's the same letters, just backwards. Um, so I think we're supposed to think he's going to a place that's going to be the opposite of where he just came from. Anyway, cool insight number 1 of the night. Okay. Cain said to the Lord, okay, this is way too far. My punishment is greater than I can bear. This is too much. You're going overboard, right? And actually, my punishment is greater than I can lift up. Lift up. That came up earlier, right? You have driven me today from the ground, which was true, and from your face I shall be hidden. Did God say that? Nope. He's assuming that. He's assuming, well, if you're pushing me further away from Eden and the garden, then I'm never going to be around you again. But God didn't say that. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. That's true. And whoever finds me out there will kill me. Okay, let's don't dig into that. All right? Whoever finds me will kill me. Well, who's out there? But okay. Then the Lord said to him, "Not so." I love that. Not so. "If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord, uh, in our English Bibles, almost all of them say put a mark on Cain, but in Hebrew it says he gave a sign for Cain, so that anyone who found him would not even strike him. So he's worried about getting killed, and God says, no, 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 no. Here's a sign for you that you're not going to be hidden from my face. I'm going to protect you. Here's the sign. Nobody's going to lay a finger on you. That'll be a sign for you that I'm protecting you. God's protecting a murderer. How gracious is that? Okay? We tend to read, I've always read these passages, and I'm like, man, God's so harsh. He's kicking them out. Like, they do something wrong, get out of here, you know. But when you really look at it close, there's so much grace in the Old Testament, we're just missing it. You ever heard somebody like pit the Old Testament against the New? Like the God of the Old Testament's this angry, vengeful God, and then the New Testament, he's like compassionate and loving and sacrifices himself. And you've heard that? People like pit them against each other. If you read it closely, the more you look at it, it looks a lot like New Testament. Okay? What did Cain do to deserve protection? Nothing. Okay? And does God know what he's going to go on to do? But he still made this promise to him. I'm going to protect you. He loves these people he made. I don't know why, but he keeps on loving them. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord. That's a pattern from Genesis 3. That's exactly where they hid from the Lord. Adam and Eve hid from the presence of the Lord. So he went away from the presence of the Lord, even though that's not exactly what he was told, but he goes away, and he settled in the land of wandering. Wandering means you don't settle. But he settled in a place and apparently eventually calls it Nod, wandering, which is Eden backwards. So he's dwelling in a place of no dwelling. It's so awesome. These stories are brilliant. Okay, so a lot of times we read past this, and a lot of commentators in modern world portray this place where he settles in this city that he builds as like this really good thing. But the Hebrew authors want you to see this is a bad thing. He's doing the opposite of what God told him to do. God told him to be alone and homeless. Why? Well, because you have trouble with people, Cain. When you get mad at them, you murder them. So I need you to be alone, and I need you to be homeless. Because if you build a home, you might decide to get married. And who knows what you'll do to your wife? Look what you did to your brother. So I need you to be alone. I need you to be homeless. What's the first thing he does? He settles down and names the place Wandering. It's like, hey God, I'm wandering. Okay? So, yes. It's a great question, isn't it? Cain knew his wife. Where the heck did she come from? It wasn't her sister. It was not his sister. He's been exiled from his family. And by the way, in the story, is there any sisters yet? Okay. So he found a wife. Where did he find her? See, here's what I do in my Bible when I study something and I never find the answer. I just put a question mark there, and then I write this: just be okay with it. With it. Just be okay with it. The author doesn't answer the question. Nobody after this answers the question. So are we supposed to know the answer to that question? Apparently not. Apparently there's people out there that are going to kill Cain that he's worried about, and apparently there's a chick out there he marries. Nobody explains it. So, and a lot of people argue and fight about this, and people call each other heretics over this. Okay, does the author tell us the answer? No. Then why do we need to fight about it? It's weird. Just be okay with it. Okay? There is a theory that the humans created in Genesis 1 um, or one is when he started humanity, and then Adam and Eve in Genesis 2 were created specifically with the purpose of being priests to all those people he created in Genesis 1. If you take that view, it makes sense out of a lot of other things in these stories, but it also adds a bunch more questions. Okay? So my view on this is the author gave us clues that seem to lead us to think there were other people around, but he doesn't answer any of those questions, which means for him, those questions aren't the important things. What he's told us are the important things. Okay? So we can just be okay with it. All right? So she conceived, Cain's wife conceived, and bore Henoch. That's how you pronounce it in Hebrew. Enoch, Henoch. And his name means dedication or inauguration. And when he built a city, well, now he's building a city. And the word for city means walled city. Cain, why do you need walls? Why do you build walls around a city in the ancient world? Yeah, to protect yourself. Cain, God said he's going to protect you. Why are you building walls? Why'd you settle down? Why'd you get married? And why are you building walls? Okay, so he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Okay? So he builds a city, a walled city. And then you get into kind of a short little genealogy here. And remember, anytime the Hebrew authors are telling us anything about genealogy, it's very important. We breeze right over that because it's so boring to us. But they would not put it in there if it's not important. So Enoch, and there's going to be another Enoch in the next chapter. It's not the same Enoch. Okay, this is Cain's line. In the next chapter, it's going to follow Seth's line. We'll talk about that next time. He had a son named Irad, which means wild or protected city. And he fathered, I love these names, Mehujael, which means smitten by God. Why would you name your kid that? Something's going on here. The author's cluing you in, but you have to know a little bit of Hebrew to see it. And Mehujael fathered Methushael, which means this one's hard to figure out. Okay, it can mean death of a god, but more likely means man as a god, or like man who thinks he's a god. But now I want to be very clear about this. The way we find the meanings of these names is we have to break the syllables apart and then see what each of those words mean in Hebrew, and then try to figure out if the author's trying to tell us something. So these aren't always accurate, but if you break them apart, you can kind of see, okay, this means smitten by God, this means a man as a god, so forth. And he fathered Lamech, who, by the way, is the seventh from Adam. There's another 7. And his name means very powerful man. And Lamech took 2 wives. He's the first polygamist in the Bible. Okay, so if anybody says, oh, there's all this polygamy and God never said it was evil, what kind of God is that to not care about that? Just pay attention. Every time polygamy is mentioned, a lot of negative things are mentioned shortly after, which is a clue. It's bad. We should not be doing this. And the fact that they said Lamech took 2 wives, which is a pattern you'll see of people taking things they aren't supposed to take. Genesis 3, she took the fruit and ate it. And this pattern goes all the way throughout. Anytime you see that somebody took something or have taken something into their hand, remember, okay, when this was first introduced, it was a bad thing. Because a lot of times, here's something you need to know about reading the Old Testament, and even sometimes in the New. Sometimes the Bible is describing something. That doesn't mean it's prescribing something. What I mean by that is this. Sometimes it's telling you what happened, and it's not making any claims about whether it was good or bad. So you'll read something, and it might look like God's saying this is okay, But just because it's in your Bible doesn't mean it's okay. It just means this is what happened. And these Hebrew authors, love to not tell you. They love to not tell you, is this good or bad? They want you to keep reading and figure it out. This is one of those cases. Lamech took 2 wives. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, today it's a bad thing. It's illegal in our country. It's not in every country. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if you keep reading, you're going to find out that Lamech guy is a violent murderer, worse than Cain. So there's an indication there that maybe this guy shouldn't have been doing this. So you see how that works? The author's not always going to tell you all the information. He wants you to keep reading and think about it. And then he wants you to come back tomorrow and read it again and think about it. And he wants you to come back tomorrow and read it again and think about it. And then one day you'll get to heaven and go, hey, I got questions. I read this over and over again and I found a lot of cool stuff, but what about this? You know what I'm saying? So it's meant to be repeatedly read. So he takes 2 wives, and the name of one of them was Ornament. That's what her name means. Adah means ornament or a beautiful thing. And the name of the other is Zillah, which means shadow or shade. It can also mean resonate or tremble, but most of the time it means shade. So he marries 2 wives. One is called ornament and one's called shade. So what does that mean? I don't know. Just keep reading. Maybe we'll learn one day. But there's something going on there. Huh? Yeah, just be okay with it. All right? And Adah bore Yaval. The J's in Hebrew sound like Y's, and the B's sound like V's. So when it's in the middle of the word. So Yaval. And it means stream. It is also a word for tribute. And, he's the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Okay. Why is he telling us this? Well, he's trying to tell you, here's where some of these things started to flourish. They came from this guy. Mass farming was this guy's idea. His brother's name was Yuval. His name means canal, like a small body of water, and it can also mean tribute. And he was the father of all those who play the lyre and the pipe, the musical instruments. He's the father of musical people. You ever read stuff like this and you're like, why is he telling us this? You just have to roll with it. And that other wife he had, Zillah, Shade also bore Tubal-Cain, which means a tribute or an offering to Cain. That's what his name means. Interesting. And he was the forger of all these instruments of bronze and iron. What kind of things? Tools, but more importantly, weapons. The first mention of weapons. Yeah. See what the author is trying to get you to do? Think, this here city of Enoch is not such a great place. Because all these descendants, one of them takes 2 wives. He's about to sing a song to his wives about how murderous he is. He's about to claim Cain's protection blessing on himself and intensify it. And act like God's going to protect him even more than Cain. And they're making weapons in this city. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah, which means beautiful charmer. A woman who is a beautiful charmer. Is there anything maybe in the next chapter or 2 where someone's going to look at women and they're beautiful and charming and they're going to come down and mess with these women? Yeah, that's coming up. This is the author saying, in a couple chapters, this is going to blow your mind. Right? So, and we're going to get there, okay? Not tonight, but we're going to get there next week. Next week will be the infamous Genesis chapter 6. the sons of God came down to the daughter. Next week, we're going to tackle that one. Okay? So just hang on to that. That's going to be a lot of fun, probably. And Lamech said to his wife, or his wives, and this is a poem in your Bible, right? It's indented, telling you this is a poem. Those are always important. Adah and Zillah, ornament and shade, hear my voice. You wives of this very powerful man you married, or that you didn't have a choice to marry because I took you. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, and a young man for striking or bruising me. Somebody struck him, a young guy struck him, he killed him. The other guy wounded him, which almost sounds accidental, like he bumped into him and he stubbed his toe and he just killed the guy. These murderous people. Wonder where he got that murderous way from. Well, probably from Cain, the whole lineage of Cain. And then look what he says. Look how prideful this is. If Cain's revenge, like God's going to protect Cain sevenfold, well, then Lamech's, I love how he says his own name. He refers to himself by his own name, you know. Wouldn't it be weird if I came up here and I was like, now Kurt's going to teach you tonight. Listen to my voice, right? So then Lamech's revenge or protection is 77-fold. Now, did God say anything to Lamech? No. He's taking this thing that was said to Cain, and he's claiming it for himself, and he's intensifying it 77-fold. So, interesting song to sing to ornament and shade. He's a prideful, murderous guy. Okay? All right. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Set. Actually, it's the S has a SH to it, but when you say it out loud, it sounds like a bad word. So we'll just, Shet. So it gets worse in the next word. So she named him that, for she said, now here's where she changes her phrase. Remember, before it was, I have created a man, like God creates men. This time, it's like she learned from that. Well, I got all prideful about that one, and he killed his brother. So this time, she's a little more humble. God has appointed for me another offspring in the place of Abel. That's this line here in Hebrews, in the place of. It's almost like God's providing a substitute in place of someone else. Is there a story in the New Testament maybe where somebody's going to be made a substitute? Yeah, like Jesus? Yeah, anyway. Actually, we read in the passage this past Sunday, Jesus said, I'm going to give my life as a ransom. That means I'm going to be given to pay the price, a substitute. Yeah, anyway. So he's appointed for me, and it's a word play. His name sounds like the word for appointed, which is S-H-I-T, interestingly enough. So I've got a replacement for Cain killed him. All right? And to Seth, a son was born, and he called his name Enosh, which means humanity or like intimate relationship in humanity. And at that time, people began to call upon the name of Yahweh. And then Genesis 4 just ends like that. Well, I think here it's implying that Seth was born, then Enosh was born, and as time goes on, those people, not Cain's descendants, Seth's descendants, began to call on the name of the Lord. Yes. Yes, we're supposed to think that Seth's lineage and then his parents, Adam and Eve, and Seth and his descendants stayed near the garden, whereas Cain went out to the east and he goes his own way. Because here's what the interesting thing you're going to find. is right after this in chapter 5. There's a long genealogy. Well, it's not all that long, but there's a genealogy from Adam to Noah, and Cain is left out of it. He's not even mentioned. hmm Yeah. So if you go to Genesis 5, it says this is the scroll or the book of the generations of Adam. God created man; he made him in the likeness of God, so on and so on. And then Adam fathered Seth, and then Seth Enosh, and then Enosh Kenan, and it goes on and on. Cain's totally left out. So you're supposed to think, okay, these people stayed calling on the name of the Lord, which is a worshipful, prayerful phrase. Cain goes off and becomes this murderous city, and they're forging instruments, and it's just getting worse. And they're doing polygamy, and it's just going bad, really bad. And here. hmm Yep. Yeah, I think the best way to see that though is it's everywhere. Um, we brought it over here. I mean, it was already here when we got here. You know, Columbus discovered a place people already were at. But how do you discover a place people already here? But anyway, uh, yeah. So I mean, we this is what humans do. We get full of ourselves and we spread violence and all kinds of stuff. So at the end here is this. Yeah. Hmm. Here's the interesting thing about that. That's exactly what I'm trying to teach you to do. I'm trying to teach you to read a text that you've read your whole life and heard about your whole life and think about it deep enough to go, huh, they mentioned the wife everywhere else. They didn't here. I wonder if there's a reason. And then you go, hmm, which is the Hebrew word for meditate. Hmm. That's what it means. It means to hum, silent, like quietly. So to meditate on the word is to come back and go, hmm, that's an interesting detail. So my answer to you is, hmm, I hadn't noticed that. I have not noticed that till just now when you pointed it out. So good job. And what's cool about this, in case you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, see, he tripped him. He don't know what he's doing. Um, I would say yes, I'm trying, but no, none of us know what we're doing. But in class today with a Hebrew professor, one of the students asked a question like that, very similar type question, and that guy who's been studying Hebrew and those 12 different Semitic languages went, hmm, I'd have to go think about that. I hadn't noticed that before. So it happens to all of us because you're going to do this the rest of your life and keep finding stuff. Okay? So good question. Good question. Let me know when you find the answer. Yes, ma'am. Well, it says in chapter 5 that my answer is I don't know, but let's chase it for a minute. Okay? I always want to be honest about that. Like I could probably make something up that sounds smart. I'd rather just say I'm not sure. So let's see. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years. So Adam lived 130 years and then had Seth. So 130 years has gone by and then had Seth. So there's a lot of room for distant cousins in the mix here. Um, you know, then Adam lives 800 years after that to 930 years, and then Seth lives 105 years and then has Enosh. So this is going to get this passage is going to get fleshed out a little more in the genealogy in the next chapter. It's going to give you a little more detail, um, and that genealogy is fascinating. We read it and we're like, oh, skip this, but the author is like, pay attention to what's going on. So I want to point out this call on the Lord thing because it's an important pattern. what's going on. This is the first time it's mentioned that someone in the story refers to God as Yahweh. Now we've seen the Lord, which is our English way of saying that's Yahweh. In the Hebrew text, it's Yahweh. Um, we've seen that in the text, but it's never told us that someone is calling him that. Okay, so that's an interesting detail. And they're calling on the name, and the Hebrew word for name is Shem. Can I think of someone that might be named Shem in the next chapter? Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Yeah, or in Taylor County it's Japheth, but it's Japheth. So it began to call on the Shem of Yahweh. Um, this is going to come up later in Genesis chapter 12. Let's see here. Let me get in the right place in my notes here. You're going to see in Genesis 12, God appears to a man named Abram by a tree, a place called Bethel. Remember the whole tree thing? Like trees keep showing up in the story. And then at the very end of the Bible, we're in the New Jerusalem and there's the tree of life. Anyway. So God appears to Abram by a tree at Bethel, so he builds an altar there, and there he calls upon the name of the Lord. Yeah. Genesis 21:33, Abraham, now his name has been changed to father of a multitude. He plants a tree in a place called Beersheba. They had really good beer there. Just kidding. Beersheba. And there he called on the name of the Lord. And then if you go fast forward into the Psalms, there's tons of that phrase, call upon the name of the Lord. It's usually in reference to asking him for help or deliverance or salvation or justice, calling on his name to provide justice. Psalm 116:17 talks about a sacrifice of thanksgiving and calling on the name of the Lord. In Genesis 4, they're making a sacrifice of thanksgiving at the door of the garden. And then the chapter ends with calling on the name of the Lord. Interesting. And then here's where it gets good. Right here. You see that? Joel 2:32. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. So in Genesis 4, it's only one line of people calling on the name of Yahweh. And then fast forward into Abraham, he's calling on the name of Yahweh, and on and on and on and on. And then there's this distinction between Israel and Gentiles. There's Jews and there's Gentiles, and Israel's calling on the name of the Lord, and the Gentiles are calling on the names of other gods. That whole thing plays out. But in Joel, who's a prophet, talking about a time in his distant future, there would come a time where everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh, not just Israelites, but everyone, will be saved. And right before that, he talks about there's going to be this time when God's going to pour out his Spirit on all people, Jews and Gentiles. And sons and daughters will prophesy and dream dreams and have visions, and everyone who calls on the name will be saved. And then in Acts 2, Peter stands up in his famous sermon at Pentecost, and what does he quote from? Joel chapter 2. And he says, it has happened. This is what Joel was talking about. And then Paul picks up on it in Romans and says, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord now will be saved. It's been fulfilled. See that? Starts in Genesis 4, goes all the way into the New Testament. The Bible is awesome. You can't make this up. You can't make it up. Now, this sets up something that we need to talk about. Let's see, it's 7:16. We got a little bit of time. There's this thing that gets set up in Genesis 3:15. If you remember, God says to the serpent, I'm going to put hostility or enmity between you and the woman, the serpent and the woman. And in what way? Well, between your seed and her seed. No, it's her offspring, which literally in Hebrew means it's seed. So between your seed and her seed, I'm going to put strife, hostility, hatred in between that. Okay, so what we get in Genesis 4 is the woman, I hope you can see this. So the woman has children, all right? Cain kills this one. And basically what we're supposed to get out of this story is instead of being the seed who will crush the snake, he ends up becoming the seed of the snake. He starts doing what the snake wants done. Overpowering humans, killing them. Because what does the snake do in the garden with Adam and Eve? Oh, you won't die. You'll just get some new knowledge. What's he doing? He's trying to kill the humans. Maybe he knows if they do this, they won't be allowed to stay here. They won't have access to the tree of life, which means they will die. If you can't get access to the tree of life, you don't live eternally. You die. That's what his mission is. Get us out of here. He hates us. He wants us gone. So Cain ends up becoming like the serpent. You see that? Now, we have to do this, and then I'll stop and we can do questions, okay? If you've got a Bible or a phone, go to John chapter 8. Let me get out of here, and I'll go to it on the screen. Here we go. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, he said, if you abide in my word, you're truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And they answered him, these are Jews, we are offspring of Abraham. We're the seed of Abraham, and have never been enslaved to anyone. You read right past that. Think about how dumb that statement just was. You're offspring of Abraham, you've never been enslaved to anyone? Really? How about Egypt, Assyria, Babylon? Y'all are always enslaved. What are you talking about? They're so prideful. We're the seed of Abraham. We're not anybody's slaves. How is it that you say we will become free? Jesus answered, truly, truly, I say to you, which means this right here is true. Everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. Sin wants to have you, and if you let it, you'll be a slave to it. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the Son, Jesus, sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are the seed of Abraham. I know that's where you came from genetically or genealogically. Yet you seek to kill me. The Jews are trying to kill him, remember? You seek to kill me. You want to murder me because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have heard from your father. They answered, well, Abraham's our father. And Jesus said, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did, which was Abraham believed God and it was counted toward him as righteousness. That's kind of the theme of his life. You'd be doing what Abraham did, but you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are doing the works that your father did. They're like, what? What? You just told us we're not doing what Abraham did, but Abraham's our father. And Jesus goes, no, you're missing the point. Abraham's not your daddy. They said, we were not born of sexual immorality. We have, they're basically saying we're not bastards. We have one Father, even God. God's our Father. Oh, we'll try this with Jesus. Okay, Jesus is making this weird thing about our dad. All right, God's our dad. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God, and I am here. I have not come on my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? I love it when Jesus says stuff like that. Why aren't you not getting this? It's because you cannot bear to hear my word. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. Its desires contrary to you, but you must rule over it. You're doing what your father desires. Your daddy's not Abraham, guys, and he sure ain't God. It's the opposite. And your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning. What does Genesis start with? What's the first words of Genesis? In the beginning. John likes to use that phrase, by the way. What's John's gospel start with? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and everything was made through him that was made. Mm-hmm. So he was a murderer from the beginning. So we're going all the way back to Genesis 3 here. And does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character. Actually, when he lies, he speaks his native tongue. For he's a liar and the father of lies. And on and on and on. But look what he says. Whoever is of God hears the word of God. You don't want to hear them because you're not of God. So you see what's going on there? He's going all the way back and he's going, no. You think you're the offspring of Abraham. And technically speaking, you're a Jew, yes, but you traded teams. Just like Cain traded teams. He was the seed of the woman. Came from the woman. But he switched teams. Became the seed of the snake. You see that? So with our decisions, what we choose to do with our anger or whatever it is we deal with, we can switch teams and start playing for the enemy. That's not all. Go to 1 John chapter 3. Gets even better. Same guy writing this. 1 John chapter 3, verse 9. Listen to the language here and just see how John is using certain words to recall us back to Genesis chapter 4. Verse 9. 1 John 3:9. No one born of God, seed of God, makes a practice of sinning. So he's not saying you don't sin, but people who are born of God, who've been recreated by God, who've been born again, born from above. Big John, chapter 3, born from above. They don't keep on practicing sin. In other words, they might sin, but they don't make a practice of it. They repent, they stop it, they move on. For God's seed abides in him. And he cannot keep on sinning, a practice of sinning, because he has been born of God. By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. So how's it evident who belongs to God and who's playing for the devil's team? Well, they don't make a practice out of sinning. If you make a practice out of sinning, then you're playing for the other team. You're the seed of the snake. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. Genesis 4. Cain and Abel, brothers. And you say, oh, you're stretching that. That's not what he's talking about. Okay. Verse 11. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one. Oh. See, I wasn't making up that switching teams part. I stole it from John. He literally said, Cain, who was of the evil one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him, you ask? Because his own deeds were evil, and his brother's righteous. Abel was doing a righteous thing. His motivation was right. He brought the best. Cain was taking the easy way out. Then he got jealous with his brother. He killed him. Why did he do that? Because he switched teams. He stopped being the seed of the woman to go be the seed of the snake. Do not be surprised, brother, that brothers, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. We don't kill them like Cain did. We love them. Whoever does not love abides in death. Wow. And this is written by a guy who heard Jesus say to him, abide in me, and I will abide in you. But if you start killing each other, you abide in death. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. And he goes on and on. Do you see what's going on here? John is looking into his Old Testament, and he says, okay, this applies today too. It's not just an ancient story. This even goes into the new covenant. So, I wanted to close this out with the New Testament because we spend a lot of our time in the Old. So, anyway, tons of stuff in that passage, and we're not even close to getting to the bottom of all of it. So, questions? The other pattern that gets set up here is the pattern of sibling rivalry. You keep reading through Genesis, you're going to notice this keeps happening. Okay? Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob, Esau, Joseph and his brothers. It's like, man, when you read it with all this in your head, you're going to be like, man, again? Then you get to a new family, like, maybe this one they'll do better. That's what you're supposed to do when you read. What's that? Yeah, yep. Yeah, it's not, well, we didn't change. We're still messed up. But as you read through, you're going to see these things keep popping up, and you're supposed to go, man, again? Okay, well, now Abraham's on the scene. You're like, all right, here's a guy who believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Yes. How does it turn out? Well, his sons, first of all, he makes a bunch of bad decisions. Then his sons make bad decisions, and their sons make bad decisions, and their sons make bad decisions. And the brothers keep wanting to kill each other all throughout Genesis. Over and over again. So, anyway, you're supposed to have all this rolling around in your head. The more you read it repeatedly, the better you get at reading, especially these first 5 books of the Old Testament. Questions? A lot of times we read the characters in the Bible and we put them at hero status. And we're like, oh, we need to be like these people. But if you read really close, you'll find out you don't really want to be like most of them. Okay? Moses, hero? Moses, good guy or bad guy? Well, both. Yeah. I mean, he starts out good, story's going great. Then he murders a guy. He has to leave. Then he comes back and it's like, yeah, he's going to get it right. And then he gets it right. And then he gets up on the mountain, and what are all the Israelites doing down at the foot of the mountain? Worshipping a calf that they built with their hands, that they made out of their own jewelry, which took a while. Yeah. He didn't. He got mad and he threw the tablets down and broke them that God had wrote with his own finger. And he goes back up the mountain. And the cool thing is Moses offers himself. God wants to kill the whole bunch. And Moses says, no, kill me. So when Jesus comes on the scene and he does all the same kinds of things that Moses has done, and then offers himself for the sake of his people. Yeah. So when we read the Old Testament and we see all these people and we think of them as heroes, we need to think of them as humans. They're humans. They're going to get it right sometimes, they're going to get it wrong sometimes. Probably more wrong than right. But God's going to keep working with them, even in their wrongness. He's going to keep working with them. When you read, I'm telling you, you read through this enough times, you get convinced that God is not giving up on this project he started. He's not giving up on us. So, There was a whole other thing from Romans I was going to share, but it's all in the notes. You can go in the app or on our website and download the notes and look into that. What Paul does in Romans chapter 1 is a fascinating chapter. Uh, he shows you the progression of sin. And it's very important we pay attention to the steps he presents. Because Paul writes in classic Greek rhetorical style, which means he's making an argument in order. In all of his letters, he writes that way. So, Romans 1, you see the first thing that they do is they don't thank God for who he is. Step 1. Next step, they start worshiping something else. And it progressively gets worse. Their mind becomes corrupted. They become violent. They start doing things sexually that are unnatural. It's all in the progression. When you read Romans 1, it's kind of haunting. Because you can look at the world around us and go, oh man, we're like getting toward the end of this progression here. So, anyway, chapter 1 of Romans is depressing. Just keep reading. There's a hinge point where Paul likes the word but. He'll give you all this terrible stuff and he'll go, but the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. So read Romans 1 and then just keep reading. And the news gets better. All right, anything else? Let me give you the main point. The main point of Genesis 4 is this. Calling on the name of the Lord is our only hope to rule over sin and continue to reflect the image of God. Calling on the name of the Lord is our only way to rule over sin. So when we're in temptation, what should we do? Abide with him. Because when Jesus said, when you abide with me, I will abide with you. And you will bear fruit. The good kind. Yep. And isn't it weird that we naturally have this thing about us with our kids that we will ask them the same questions God asked his kids in these stories? He's like, where are you? And the implication is, you're hiding from me, really? Like, I made the place. I can see you. I mean, you're behind a tree. I can literally go like this, and I can see all the trees. You know? It's like, really, where are you right now? You know, it's a very deep question, very philosophical question. Yeah, he's not confused. Oh, where'd Adam go? I mean, it's kind of implied that he knows where he is because he's talking to him. Where are you? You don't say that if you have no clue that they're around, you know. It's not like, I go home and nobody's home and I go, where are you? I know they're not home. The car's not here. I'm not talking to somebody that I know is not there. It's very strange language to say that the voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. That's very strange to us. To the first readers of these texts, it made perfect sense. We have to remember that we're modern Westerners. These were ancient Easterners. There's a whole, and there's thousands of years of time that language changes. So when they read that, they knew exactly what that meant because that was common in their culture to say that. Um, so, yep, yep, right. The Israelites were not to eat meat with the blood still in it because that animal's life is in its blood. That's how they perceived it. That's, yes, that was common in the ancient world, that your life was in your blood and in your breath. Because they knew quite a few things in common sense. Well, that one guy got cut and he bled and then he stopped breathing. So apparently there's some life in that red stuff and in that stuff coming out of your mouth all day long. You know. So we have to remember these are ancient people. They don't have they didn't have John Hopkins Medical Center to explain all this to them. They're doing the best with what they got. So, but that idea of the blood coming up out of the ground, I don't know that we're supposed to. Well, this will be a good teaching moment. Uh, there's a the question is that literal or is it like a metaphor for something? Okay, that's a Western way to think about that. When we say is it literal or metaphorical, in the Eastern mind, those aren't opposed to each other. In the Western mind, those are two opposite things. In the biblical world, the answer would be yes. Well, yes, and it means other stuff. So that's a paradigm we need to have in our minds that something can literally be happening and be metaphorical for something else later. So just don't make literal and metaphor enemies. They're in the Bible they're brothers and they don't kill each other. Hmm. The point is God noticed and it meant something to him to come back down and go, "Hey, we need to talk about that." Yeah. What have you done? It's the same exact phrase in Hebrew. Yeah. What? Yep. That's the point. That's the point of Genesis 3 and 4. When your kids mess up, kick them out. Exile. Exile for you. You are cursed from the house. Yes. I I think so. I think that the very next chapter is going to clue us into this thing about the ground because the guy is going to be born named Noah, and his name means rest or relief. And his father names him that because he says, "This one, Noah, this one will bring us relief from the ground, from the work on the ground that the Lord cursed." That whole that's like a hinge point at the end of I think it's at the end of chapter 5, verse 28 and 29. That sentence, here, I'll just read it to you. Lamech different Lamech, had lived 182 years, fathered a son, and called his name Noach, saying, "Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief," which sounds like the word Noah, "from our work and from our painful, I forgot the word, but it's the same Hebrew word for that is used when God's talking to Adam in Genesis 3. He says, "You're going to, in pain, you will work the ground." It's the same word here. Um, He'll bring us relief from our work and from our painful toil of our hands. So there's the whole ground being cursed, the painful work and the stress and emotional pain of having to work and try to get the ground to do something. All of that gets dumped into this one verse, and it's like a hinge into the next part of the story. So all that to say, there's something there about the blood has went into the ground has been cursed, crying out, God has to come get involved. You're going to keep seeing that. Yeah, you're going to see a cry from the Israelites up to the Lord from the land of Egypt. And God says, "I have heard your cry." So now we're gonna go talk to Pharaoh. If he don't listen, we've got 10 things. You're gonna get 10 chances to let my people go. So that's gonna keep coming up. Sodom and Gomorrah, same thing. The outcry of Sodom has come up before me. So it's a very common theme. So I think there's more there. I don't know what it is yet, but there's something. All those terms are used intentionally, so there's something going on. My gut reaction is it's chronological. It's not simultaneous for sure because Seth is clearly a replacement of Abel. God has given me one in place of. the one that was killed. So yeah, it's chronological in that sense. But how long? I don't know. I could probably do some math here in the genealogy and figure it out. But since I'm a preacher, not a mathematician, it'd take me too long. So yeah, I think it is meant to be chronological, but I don't know that. And I want you to be careful with the all those numbers in the genealogy about how old people were. Just remember, all ancient genealogies that we find are not using numbers the same way we use numbers, and they're not doing genealogical stuff the same way we do it today. We're very intent on being exact, and they'll like skip generations. Matthew chapter 1, when he's doing the genealogy of Jesus, he skips multiple generations in that genealogy because genealogies in the ancient world are making a point, and the point is not to tell you exactly everybody in the family. That's our point to genealogies. Their point is theological. They're making theological points. Right. Their goal is not to have everything perfectly in perfect order and all that. They're actually doing a whole other thing with genealogies than what we do today. Okay? So to just I'm not saying these numbers are wrong. Don't hear me say that. What I'm saying is they're not meaning the same thing that you want it to mean. And ancient genealogies and ages and all that kind of stuff. Because we found a bunch of them outside the scripture that are doing the same kinds of things, and what we learn is that that was a common way of doing this in that time. When they do genealogies, they're trying to make other points. They're not trying to be perfectly accurate every time. So, I mean, Matthew skips a bunch of generations. Matthew intentionally, in chapter 1 of Matthew, in Jesus' genealogy, if you compare it to Luke's genealogy, it's different. That doesn't mean one of them's wrong. It means Luke's doing something different than Matthew's trying to do with a genealogy. Matthew's a Hebrew, a Jew. Luke's a Gentile. They got different goals in how they do things. So Matthew's intentionally doing 14 generations in each set. And if you take 14 in Hebrew and do something called gematria, which is something they love to do in the Hebrew world, it equals Son of God. So that's what Matthew's doing. That's why he's skipping generations, because he's making it add up to 14. So his Hebrew audience would know his genealogy is pointing us to the identity that Jesus is the Son of God. So that's what they're doing. Same thing's going on here. There's 10 generations mentioned, and 10's a big number in the Old Testament. God spoke 10 times in creation. He gives 10 commandments, over 10 plagues, 10 generations from Adam to Noah. They're doing more than just giving you names and ages. That's the point. Yeah, the Jew-Gentile thing, here's kind of how it works. Now, the Jews got this wrong repeatedly, but biblically speaking, Abraham was called to father sons that would lead to a son named Jacob, who gets renamed Israel. And that name means one who struggles with God. It's a fitting name for the story. um, their job was to represent Yahweh like priests. There were to be a kingdom of priests, kind of like Adam and Eve in the garden were supposed to be priests. They're to be priests to the nations. So the plan all along was everybody. But the problem with Israel is they struggle with God a lot, and they don't fulfill their mission, and they get prideful and think it's only for them. But the intention was always for everybody. So the Jews, in their disobedience and in their pride, would get into a place where they think they're the only ones that matter to God, and God's just going to kill everybody else one day. That's how they thought. But that's not what their Bible was telling them to think. The whole point, so when Joel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel come on the scene, and they're talking about all the nations, there's coming a new covenant and I'm going to pour out my spirit on all the nations. That was the prophets trying to get Israel to remember what their job is. Their job is the whole world, not just Israel. Um, Even in the Old Testament, a Gentile could become part of Israel. But when they did that, that meant you're going to follow our God and his law and his way of life. So there was never an exclusion of anybody who's not an Israelite. The whole point the whole time was for everybody. Does that make sense? Yes, they were chosen, but that does not mean saved. Okay, now the Protestant Reformation helped us miss the point of this by calling chosen or elect to refer to individual salvation, and they missed the point. The point of the chosen is I'm choosing you to get to the others. It doesn't mean they're saved because they rebel. So if being the chosen people means they're saved and have eternal life, then we got a lot of Baal worshiping, Ashtaroth worshiping, Molech worshiping Israelites in heaven, because a lot of them did that, and they died in that state. Um, so I don't know if that made it any clearer or made it worse, but you did. It's a very good question because that's a very common misconception that throws off whole theological systems. Is that if election or predestination or chosen, if that means saved, eternal life, then that's going to cause a lot of issues with the whole storyline. What it means is I've picked you for a reason, and as long as you stay faithful and loyal to me, you're part of that plan. Yes, we've been grafted in, as Paul would say. So if you think of Israel as a plant or a vine, we got grafted in. So the whole the whole modern thing about Israel, a lot of them are missing the point. A lot of them are reading too much into things, like the chosen. They're the chosen. Okay, they're God's chosen people. Okay, but what about those Jews who've rejected Jesus as Messiah? Are they still chosen? The Scripture says no. You're not in. So God had a purpose for Israel, but that was a temporary purpose. Your purpose is I'm going to come through you, make you into a great nation, a kingdom of priests, and I will bring about the seed of the woman who will crush the snake. And that will be fulfilled, and then it's all nations. Everybody's in who wants to be in. Yes, there was a place of the tabernacle and the temple where Gentiles could come and worship, but they couldn't go into the innermost parts because they weren't Jews. Whole long story behind that. By the time Jesus comes along, they build another wall further out, and they don't let them in. They've pushed them out another layer, and they even have a sign. We found the sign. There's a block of stone, and it's carved into there. If you're a Gentile and you walk over this line, you're dead. We will kill you. We found it. That wasn't Christians. That was Jewish people. Yeah, when Jesus comes on the scene, he walks into that kind of Judaism. And they were completely exclusionary of the Gentiles, and they were waiting on God to show up and kill everybody but them. Yeah. Jesus is picking up on, Jesus is using phrases that all these Jews who were listening to him they would have been thinking about Genesis 4 when he said, no, I don't say you forgive them 7 times, I say you forgive them 77 times. And they would have went, oh, yeah, God forgave Cain for killing his brother, protected him sevenfold. Oh, they would have been tracking. Yeah. I didn't bring that out on that Sunday because I was probably running out of time. But or I did this thing where I just forget. Yeah. But Yeah, but that ties into this. So when you get all this stuff in your head, you'll be reading in the New Testament and you'll notice something like that and you'll go, wait a minute. You go back to Genesis and read it again and then go back to your passage in the New Testament and you'll see how they interpret each other. If we can get this stuff into our head, I promise you, okay, I'll make you a promise. If you can get these things in your head, you will enjoy reading the Bible. Because everything will start popping off the page at you. In every story, you're going to see all these little phrases, and you'll be like, oh, well, let's see what we can find in this story. It will be more fun to you. Even if you don't like to read. I used to hate to read. Hated it. I failed the first 2 weeks of college. Of Bible college. I failed every quiz in every class every day for 2 weeks because I had no idea how to study. Because I never really had to till I got there. So you'll like it the more you do it. It's like working out. How many of y'all work out? A few of you. But if you stay with it, you enjoy it, don't you? That's why you keep doing it. You actually do enjoy it, even though you're like punishing yourself. You get something out of it. Or it's like running. When you run, the first few times you run, it's brutal. You hate it. But like the third and fourth day, there's like this runner's high thing you get, and it's actually a chemical in your brain that happens. And you start liking it, and you want to keep doing it. And as long as you keep doing it, you'll keep liking it. But then miss a week, and it's hard to get back into it. The Bible works the same way. If you just keep exercising this, the more you're going to enjoy it.